Yo, what's up, y'all? Good morning. We out here. It's Buff Missionary in these streets. Getting back on Lamentations. Took a little detour yesterday talking about Psalm 23, which was actually really dope. Getting some new perspectives on a chapter that I enjoy so much. But back to Lamentations and the study of really kind of depressing themes and odd themes. And today, more difficult themes in terms of kind of people's perception of God. And you'll see as we get into chapter 2 here. But just want to remind you, like, subscribe, share. Liking helps the videos get out to more people and let other people be able to see this stuff. So it's pretty cool and a good opportunity there. Just trying to encourage other people to provoke thought and to think on how we can incorporate biblical principles practically into our day-to-day experience. Because a lot of times it seems like just ideas and thoughts and kind of concepts that impact one aspect of our life instead of the complete aspects and all aspects of our lives. It's a little early, stumbling on my words a little bit here, but it's okay. I think you get what I'm saying. And once again, the questions for Bible study that I like to use are going to be down in the description, so you can check those out just to get some helpful perspectives and some practical ways, some practical things that you can ask yourself to get a little bit more meaning out of the text. But without any further ado, we jump into chapter 2 of Lamentations, and of course said a prayer before getting on the I almost said the call, the video here, asking for the Holy Spirit's guidance and inspiration to interpret the text, so we're not putting our own ideas out here. But chapter 2, right off the bat, it kind of touches on something that is sensitive for me as a Christian, maybe sensitive for a lot of Christians as well. It's called God's anger with Jerusalem. And it's because I think there's a lot of misconception about God's anger. Do I believe that God gets angry? Yes, I do. Do I think that God being angry is more often mistaken because of our lack of understanding and our selfish perspectives? Yes. So I think that both can be true. I think that God can be angry and have legitimate reasons to be angry, and I think that's a biblical thing. You have Jesus overturning the tables in the temple courtyard, right? So I think you can have God being angry and legitimate reasons for him to be angry. But I also think that a lot of times for us going through life and kind of looking at things that are not happening in our favor, we tend to sum it up as God being angry with us or having a problem with us, when that may not necessarily be the case. Part of me wonders if both might be at play here within this chapter of Lamentations. And we'll kind of see. This is just based off of the title and just the interesting thoughts that come to my mind when I think of that concept, God's anger. But let's jump into the text here and see what the Bible has to say for itself. Chapter 2, verse 1. How the Lord has covered the daughter of Zion with a cloud in his anger. He cast down from heaven to earth the beauty of Israel and did not remember his footstool in the day of his anger. So yeah, I mean, right from the jump, it's like God has done all of these things to us because he is angry with us. And how can both of the two things mentioned earlier be true at the same time? Well, do I think it's possible that God could have been angry with his people for not doing what he asked them to do? Yes. But do I think that God's anger is the reason why it seems that Jerusalem is feeling all this? No. Because of consequence. Jerusalem and Israel as a people repeatedly went against what God was asking to do, especially in the missional aspect of the covenant relationship and became more exclusive with the things that they had been given, the things that had been shared with them with the intent of being shared to other people. They kept it to themselves. And as a result, the relationships and the expression of God's character that should have been built within other cultures and nations never happened. So a lot of the animosity and the blowback from that, I think it's both. It happened as a result of consequence. This is what's going to happen if you don't do this, because these people don't get a chance to see me for who I really am. You don't get to build a relationship there, so there's no barrier there. But also, God could be upset that his people didn't do what he asked them to do. It's like, take a parent, right? Who has a child, and they're telling the child, hey, if you do things this way, it's finals week, right? So let's use that as an example. A parent is telling their child, hey, you need to study and make sure that you're putting work in on all of these different tests and classes that you have, because if you do, you'll probably get a good grade. But if you don't, you're probably going to fail. And what happens if you fail? Well, you may not have good opportunities after school, going into secondary education or master's level or internships or even the workplace. You may have more limited opportunity if you don't take this seriously and put the effort into study. Let's say the child does not study, ends up failing all the classes, ends up missing out on great internship opportunities, not getting a good job, and ends up staying at home and being a bum for the rest of their lives. That's kind of dramatic. A parent in that situation, though, they might be a little upset. They might be a little bit angry that the child didn't take their advice or encouragement and do what they were asking them to do. But the parent's anger or upsetness is not what caused the child to not have the good opportunities or to get the internships or to have the great paying jobs after that. Both can be true. Both can be true. And the child on the flip side can blame the parent for not following what the parent said, or they can embrace their own accountability and responsibility within the situation. And it's kind of something that came up in chapter 1 as well. Kind of the lack of willingness to be accountable and hold responsibility versus acknowledging it and seeing how the frustration with God fit into that. So I think that's interesting, but I do think that both can be true. Verse 2, the Lord has swallowed up and has not pitied all the dwelling places of Jacob. He has thrown down in his wrath the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought them down to the ground. He has profaned the kingdom and its princes. So it's like, oh God, it's your fault that all our cities are getting overrun. It's like, well, what if God was the one telling you to do something that would have been your greatest defense and you didn't do it? Well, you could only expect to get overtaken and overrun in that regard because you didn't have the right defense. But that's not God's fault. You can get mad at him because he said it, but it was because of me not choosing to follow what he said that results in my defenses being weak, which results in me getting overtaken. And again, when it comes to the covenant relationship that God wanted with his people, the defense wasn't there because the relationships weren't there. The connections weren't built with the surrounding nations. It was all this. And so when the natural consequence for not following God's instructions happens over the course of time, those defenses were easily overrun. And Jerusalem tried and tried, but they couldn't withstand against the might of these other nations that came in that could have been allies to them. It's interesting. But that's not God's fault. God might be upset they didn't listen, but it's not God's fault that it happened. So this interesting perspective. And again, I think the thing that I find so fascinating about it is this is the expression of one man on behalf of the personification of a nation that impacts a lot of people and that a lot of people can identify with. So it really feels like Jeremiah is just putting himself in the mind of the people through the personification of Jerusalem for some reason. And when we were going through the kind of lead up in the prep of, and the background and the context of the book of Lamentations, we know that it's going in the direction of hope. So I'm curious to see how he turns it from this perspective to the other one. And I actually wonder if there's extra biblical sources or something that would speak to Israel's response to what Jeremiah has written. I'd be very curious to know about that. Verse 3, he has cut off in fierce anger every horn of Israel. He has drawn back his right hand from before his enemy. He has blazed against Jacob like a flaming fire, devouring all around. You know, this one here specifically reminds me of Israel in the wilderness. I think it was with Moses, and I think it had something to do with snakes in the camp. And it was something very similar to where God has said, hey, my people, this is what I need you to do. And God's people under his protection had kind of taken for granted God's protection, right? And didn't realize that God's protection in large degree, at least at that point, was conditional. It's like, you follow me, you acknowledge me, I continue to protect you. But when you step away from this stuff and when you get into all this idol worship, I'm just going to step back. I'm not actively doing anything crazy to you, and I'm not displaying any kind of ridiculous anger towards you. I'm just taking a step back. And the natural things that would be happening to you, but are prevented because I'm actually in your midst, now you get to experience nature at its natural and at its most brutal. So God takes a step out of the camp, and all of a sudden these snakes and stuff start coming through and biting up the people. A bunch of people start dying. Moses has to, I believe this is the same story, Moses has to forge this like the bronze serpent on the cross, and the people had to look at it and live, kind of a thing. And it's like, there's a big difference between me walking with God and embracing his protection, and then suddenly taking that for granted, and I step away from God, and now crazy things are happening to me because I'm not walking with him anymore. That's on me. That's not on God. But in our perspective, we often look at it like, well, you stepped away from me, and not only did you step away, but you're making these things happen to me. And so it makes us even more rebellious in our state of rebellion instead of taking the accountability and the personal responsibility for the things that we've done. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's perspective, you know? Verse 4, standing like an enemy, he has bent his bow. With his right hand, like an adversary, he has slain all who were pleasing to his eye. On the tent of the daughter of Zion, he has poured out his fury like fire. So yeah, once again, it's this same picture of all this destruction that we're going through. It's your fault, God. Why are you so angry with us? Why are you so upset? Never mind the covenant relationship and Israel's failure at this time to fully embrace it in the way that God intended. It doesn't have anything to do with my issue and my failure to follow through on what I said or agreed that I would do based on what you said, God. No. It's all you. It's all your fault. That's why this stuff is happening. What you so angry for? Why are you so mad? Why are you mad, bro? And it's just an interesting perspective to have that Jeremiah's portraying here on behalf of Israel. Verse, actually, we'll stop there. The next it continues. Chapter 2 is actually kind of long, so I'm just noticing this. It's 22 verses dealing with God's anger. And we'll see just different ways that it continues to be expressed as we go through these verses. But all this stuff is graphic, If you really imagined God, or whatever your picture of God is, doing the things that Jeremiah is saying God has done in an expression of his anger, maybe this gets more to the practical side. Taking a surface level context of this, removed from the book or the story or the context of what's actually happening when this is written, or in response to what it's being written about. Can you be mad at people who have this kind of view of God, that, oh, he's always looking over your shoulder, and because you messed up, this is why your life sucks? And even when I say that, I realize I'd kind of been looking at it from Jeremiah as a prophet, speaking on the personification of Jerusalem and this mentality that Jerusalem is feeling and expressing that many people can relate to. But I think it's evident that the people did think this way, because when you look further down into the New Testament and the viewpoints or the views towards people who were not perfect, like lepers, you're like this because you've done something wrong. Or for people who were less fortunate or not as well off, it was all kind of related to this idea or belief that these people were not good enough. You didn't do everything that God wanted you to do, so you're experiencing this because God's wrath is upon you, kind of a thing. So that was legitimately a mentality that they had, which is a problem. But at the same time, if people back then had that mentality about God, I shouldn't be necessarily so surprised that people today have that mentality about God. And when we think about the reason that Jesus came to this earth, it wasn't just to save his people from their sins. The second and perhaps equally important reason was to show us the Father. Those two things, because Jesus can come to save us from our sins, and he can talk about his Father all he wants to, but if we don't trust that God the Father is actually invested in our well-being and in the good aspects of our lives, what would we trust his kind of salvation for? That would seem like a really raw deal to sign up for. So it's important that Jesus came to show us what God is really like. That he's kind, that he's loving, the fruits of the Spirit, So this is something apparently that God's people and just people in general have been struggling with for a long time. This perspective of God as this creditor. Oh man, Steps of Christ, that book, it has a lot of good things to say about the perspective that Satan wanted people to have about God, so that they would run away from God instead of towards God. And we see that. And I think we struggle with that as well. And I think it's okay. That's the other thing. It's okay to struggle with that and to have incorrect views, because God can handle that. It comes back to this. And eventually, hopefully, we can have some hope as we realize what God is really about, as we cry out in our anguish and in our sorrow to God. I think about this concept of God's anger, and you look at things in your life that happen, you're like, dang it, man, why is this stuff going on, God? What did I do? What did I do to you, man? What did I do to offend you? Why you got such a problem with me? I got some strange and disturbing texts from my mom yesterday. Not gonna go into detail, but just a lot of it, I read it and I'm just like, man, why is this stuff going on, man? Like, I'm tired of this. There's nothing I can do about it, but those questions always come up, like, God, why me? Why my family? Why is this something that we have to go through? And it can be very easy, and we all have our different things along those lines, whether it's related to health, whether it's related to family members who aren't with us anymore, whatever it might be. We all have something like this, where we look inwardly and we think that, man, this is happening because I did something wrong, or because I wasn't good. And it's bigger than that, you know? But it can be easy to fall into that, and as a result to say, oh, well, since God has a problem with me, these things are happening, and so I don't have any interest in God. It can be very easy to fall into that trap. And that's what the enemy wants, obviously. Because I do think that being with God in situations like that is the best way to make it through them with a positive or just an even outlook, as opposed to a negative and harmful outlook. So it really does impact us in a practical way. This experience that we're reading about, that God's people struggled with back then, is something that we struggle with here today. From that preview of Lamentations, we know that after this chapter that is talking about this expression of God's anger and all the horrible things that he's doing to his people, right in the middle of the book, it talks about the hope that Jeremiah has. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how he gets there, because this is some pretty sharp, like, and harsh stuff right now. So I'm very interested to see how he rounds that corner to get there. Not just for the sake of the story that's being told here, but for the sake of myself and the views that I have about God and some of the things that are going on with my family. And for you, as you're going through this video, thinking about those things that bug you about life and the struggles that you and your loved ones are going through. So we'll see. We'll see when we get there. But yeah, until then, hopefully you got something, and we'll see how the next one goes. So we out here and we out. Peace.